He was the kind of man who never missed a morning coffee with his neighbor until one day he did. No note, no phone, no trace. The safe stood wide open, the dog was starving, and his much younger husband was thousands of miles away in France. But when the truth surfaced, it wasn't just betrayal. It was a double life, a secret family, and a murder planned down to the last detail. This is the chilling story of Malik Owens and how love became the deadliest trap of all. Welcome to True Crimes Altar, where every sin is punished, every betrayal has a cost, and every soul must answer to the truth. Like, comment, and subscribe, because these are the stories the guilty prayed would stay buried. Malik Owens was 66 years old, a retired school principal, stable, and respected by everyone on his street in Charlotte, North Carolina. He wasn't the kind of man who disappeared without warning. He loved his routines, especially his morning coffee with Ms. Gloria Freeman, the widowed neighbor across the street. For 9 years, they'd met on Malik's porch at exactly 7 a.m., rain or shine, birthdays and holidays included. Even when Malik had a cold, he'd sit out there in his robe just to keep their ritual alive. But on this particular Tuesday, Malik was nowhere to be found. At first, Gloria thought he was sleeping in. By 8 o'clock, she was worried. By 9, she felt a knot in her stomach. She crossed the street, knocked on his door, called his phone. Straight to voicemail. She peered through the blinds. Everything looked normal, but the silence inside felt wrong. That's when she called 911. 2 patrol officers arrived before noon. From the outside, Malik's home looked perfectly untouched. The lawn was freshly mowed, the walkway swept. The front door was locked from the inside, but Gloria had a spare key for emergencies. Inside, nothing looked ransacked. No broken glass, no overturned furniture. But little things were off. Malik's Labrador, Clover, was curled up in the hallway, clearly distressed. Her food and water bowls were bone dry. The upstairs safe Malik had installed after retirement was wide open and completely empty. The jewelry drawer was cleaned out. Gone were his father's gold watch, the silver chain he wore to church, and the diamond ring he'd once said he would leave to someone special. His wallet was missing, his phone gone, his car missing from the driveway. Yet his house keys sat neatly on the kitchen counter. This didn't look like a man who decided to leave. It looked like someone had come for him, and whoever it was knew exactly what they were doing. Detectives were called in that afternoon. No fingerprints beyond Malik's, no blood, no drag marks, no camera footage. Neighbors hadn't seen a thing. But the safe being emptied and the jewelry missing made it clear, if this was a robbery, it was personal. Detective Laura Simmons stood in the center of the bedroom and quietly observed that whoever did this hadn't broken in. They'd been let in. Wrapped in a blanket on Gloria's porch, Gloria finally spoke. Malik had a husband, Jean-Luc Moreau, younger, from France. He'd been traveling a lot lately. Gloria last saw him 2 weeks ago. Malik had said Jean-Luc went back to France to take care of his sick mother, but she noticed Malik had been quieter than usual in recent weeks. The pieces began to shift. This wasn't random. Someone close to him had the access and the knowledge to walk in, empty his safe, and vanish without a trace. But the story didn't begin with Malik's disappearance. 14 years earlier, he hadn't been looking for love. He'd been on a rare vacation in Miami Beach, hoping to clear his head and escape the loneliness that had been pressing in on him. He'd retired early, traded school hallways and ringing bells for linen shirts and ocean views. But instead of feeling free, he felt invisible. Then came Jean-Luc, tall, smooth, with a Martinican French accent like music, working the bar at Malik's beachfront hotel. The first night, Malik ordered a glass of red wine. Jean-Luc made it memorable. The second night, Jean-Luc greeted him by name. By the third, they were talking after hours about music, childhood memories, food, and family. Jean-Luc asked questions like he cared, listened like Malik mattered. For the first time in years, Malik felt seen. They exchanged numbers before Malik flew back home.
If you're enjoying this video, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. Share and like this video. It's free and won't cost anything, but it helps and encourages us to grow and do more. Thank you for your kindness, and back to the video.
The text began the next day, then calls, then late-night video chats. 3 months later, Jean-Luc visited Charlotte. At first, Malik helped him find an apartment, but Jean-Luc was soon spending most nights at Malik's house. He cooked, he cleaned, he rubbed Malik's shoulders after long walks, and even Clover warmed to him, a rare thing. 6 months in, Jean-Luc moved in. A year after meeting, they married in a quiet courthouse ceremony with a few friends present. No one from Jean-Luc's family attended. Malik didn't press. He told himself maybe they were estranged. Maybe they wouldn't approve of the marriage. But every year, Jean-Luc made a trip back to France to care for his sick mother. Malik had never spoken to her, never seen her on video calls. Once, Malik offered to go with him, but Jean-Luc said it wasn't a vacation and Malik would be miserable. He always came back with gifts: French chocolates, bottles of wine, handmade scarves. He came back with laughter and affection. Malik let it go. For years, he let it go. Outwardly, their life was perfect. Inside, there were cracks. Jean-Luc never posted photos of Malik, said he preferred privacy. Sometimes Malik would wake in the night to hear Jean-Luc whispering sharply in French into his phone. He always claimed it was a cousin or friend going through something. Whenever Malik asked too much, Jean-Luc would distract him with a smile, a kiss, or something more physical. By their 5th year, Malik's friends began to ask questions. Why had he never been to France? Why no family introductions? Why all the blocked calls? Malik would repeat Jean-Luc's explanation. His family was old-fashioned and wouldn't understand their relationship. That answer satisfied no one but Malik. His best friend Patrick once pushed harder, asking if the situation would be acceptable if the roles were reversed. Malik had no answer, but love makes it easy to ignore what you don't want to see. For every red flag, Jean-Luc had a warm touch or a plan for their future, and Malik, who had spent so many years alone, wanted to believe. The money trouble started with an idea. Jean-Luc wanted to open a small French cafe. Malik dipped into his retirement savings for a lease, permits, and equipment, but the cafe never opened. Delays, missing paperwork, always an excuse. 6 months later, Jean-Luc suggested importing fine French wines to sell in local markets. Malik co-signed a small loan, but the business never launched. Over the years, the money trickled away until Malik's savings were nearly gone. He never fully confronted Jean-Luc, only suggested they slow down. Jean-Luc reacted with hurt, accusing Malik of not believing in him. Malik folded and apologized. And then came another trip to France. This time, Jean-Luc returned with a guest. "This is Solane," he said. "My cousin. First time in the States. She'll be staying with us a while." Solane was polite, soft-spoken, and observant. Too observant. She never called Jean-Luc cousin. Malik noticed, but stayed silent. At night, he overheard them speaking quickly in French, their tone urgent. He couldn't make out the words, but it didn't sound affectionate. He didn't confront them. Silence had become his habit. But his doubt was growing, and soon it would be impossible to ignore. One night, Malik went to bed early. His body was tired, but his mind was restless. Around 2 a.m, he woke with a dry throat and decided to get a glass of water. The house was dark and still. As he passed the guest room, the door was cracked just enough for him to see inside. Under the soft glow of a lamp, Jean-Luc and Solane lay together in bed. His arm was draped over her, her head nestled into his chest, their bodies close in a way no cousins should be. Malik froze. The shock didn't come with yelling or slamming doors. It came with a deep, quiet clarity. Something inside him broke in silence. He walked to the kitchen, poured his water and drank it slowly, almost methodically, as if the extra seconds might help him absorb what he'd just seen. The next morning, nothing changed for them. Solane made breakfast as if nothing had happened, and Jean-Luc hummed in the shower. But for Malik, the illusion had shattered. 13 years of trust collapsed into a heap of unanswered questions. He began to see the pattern, the secret calls, the unexplained trips, the missing money. And deep down, he realized he'd always known something was wrong. He needed the truth, not another lie. Within days, he found a discreet private investigator named Renee Carter and paid her in cash. He gave her a name, a photo, and one request: find out who Jean-Luc really is. A week later, she called him. Her voice was steady, but her words cut deep. Jean-Luc Moreau didn't exist. His real name was Thierry Duval, and he had a criminal history in France: fraud, forgery, identity theft. Soline wasn't his cousin. She was his wife. They had 2 children together, living in Marseille. Every annual trip to care for his sick mother had been a trip home to them. There was no illness. There was only a second life, a fully documented marriage, family photos, birth records, and social media posts. Malik sat with the file in his lap, staring at the truth. For over a decade, Thierry had been running a scam. The charm, the attention, the marriage, it was all a setup to drain Malik's savings. This wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. Malik's hands trembled with rage and humiliation. He confronted Thierry that evening, unable to hold back. "I know who you are. I know about Marseille. I know about Soline." Thierry froze, eyes on the folder in Malik's hands. In a flash, he lunged, grabbing Malik's phone before he could react. "Soline," he barked. She appeared almost instantly, a gun in her hand, calm and purposeful. "Sit," she ordered. Thierry shoved a chair behind Malik, and he lowered himself into it slowly, his eyes locked on the gun. Duct tape came next, wrists, ankles, chest bound to the chair. Malik's phone buzzed once on the counter, Gloria's name lighting the screen. His last chance, gone. Thierry unlocked Malik's laptop and shoved it in front of him. "Bank login," he demanded. Malik hesitated until the cold metal pressed against his temple. He logged in. They drained every account: retirement, savings, investments. Thierry took his checkbook, his credit cards, every password he could force out of him. Then he asked for the jewelry. Malik pointed upstairs. Thierry returned with a box full of watches, rings, and cufflinks. He looked at Malik for a long moment, then stepped back. Soline didn't flinch. One gunshot ended it. Thierry dragged Malik's body into the garage, wrapped it in a tarp, and shoved it into the trunk of Malik's own car while Soline scrubbed every surface. By sunrise, the house looked untouched. Curtains drawn, bed made, coffee pot rinsed. Just another quiet morning on a quiet street, except Malik was gone. By the next morning, Gloria realized something was terribly wrong. Malik had never missed their coffee 2 days in a row. She called the police again, her voice tight with fear. This time, officers took a closer look. Inside the house, they found faint traces of bleach in the kitchen and a dining chair slightly out of place. Clover was still unfed, pacing near the door. Malik's phone was off, his car was gone, but the bank had already flagged unusual overnight activity: large transfers from his retirement and savings accounts, credit cards maxed out in hours. One card had been used just after 3 a.m. at a hotel near Charlotte Douglas International Airport. Detectives moved fast. When they arrived at the hotel, the front desk clerk confirmed a man matching Jean-Luc Moreau's description had checked in with a woman, paid in cash, and kept looking over his shoulder. Surveillance footage showed them wheeling 2 large suitcases into the building before dawn. In the parking lot, officers spotted Malik's car. They popped the trunk and found him wrapped in a tarp, a single gunshot to the chest, duct tape still around his wrists. They called in backup immediately. Inside the hotel, detectives coordinated quietly, sealing exits and sweeping each floor. Just after 2 in the afternoon, Thierry and Soline stepped outside, pulling their suitcases toward the airport shuttle. A black SUV cut them off at the curb, officers surrounding them in seconds. Thierry bolted, making it halfway across the sidewalk before he was slammed to the ground. Soline screamed, tears streaming as she claimed she didn't know what was happening, but in her purse was Malik's gold watch and wedding ring. Thierry's bag held fake passports, Marseille-bound plane tickets, and stacks of cash. Their escape had been planned down to the hour, but the trail they left behind had been faster than they were. By nightfall, both were in custody, facing charges that would unravel every lie they had told for the last 13 years. 6 months later, the trial of Thierry Duval and Soline Duval opened in a Mecklenburg County courtroom that was filled to capacity long before the first gavel fell. The public wanted to see the faces behind the betrayal that had shocked the quiet neighborhood where Malik Owens once lived. Reporters lined the hallways, and every seat in the gallery was taken by a mix of friends, curious strangers, and neighbors who'd followed the case since the day Malik vanished. From the start, the prosecution came armed with evidence that was not just compelling, but devastating. They displayed photos from the hotel security footage showing Thierry and Soline wheeling their luggage across the lobby at 4:37 a.m., looking tense, glancing over their shoulders. Another still showed Thierry at the front desk, leaning in as he signed a form under the name Jean-Luc Moreau, the same alias he had used to marry Malik. Detectives took the stand to walk the jury through the chain of evidence. They explained how DNA swabs from the duct tape binding Malik's wrists and ankles came back as a match to both Thierry and Soline. They recounted the moment officers opened the trunk of Malik's own car and found him wrapped in a tarp, a single gunshot wound to his chest, the tape still holding him in place. Then came the financial records. Large transfers had been made from Malik's accounts between 2:55 and 3:18 a.m. on the night of his death, all traced to devices in Thierry's possession. Credit cards were maxed out within hours, with purchases and cash withdrawals in the Charlotte area, including the hotel where they were arrested. But it was the travel history that widened the scope of the case. A federal investigator testified that Thierry's passport showed a pattern of entries and exits into France that perfectly aligned with school holidays in Marseille, the same city where his real family lived. Every one of those trips, he had told Malik, was to care for his sick mother. In reality, he was going home to his wife and 2 children, living an entire second life that Malik knew nothing about. The prosecution then unveiled the most damning evidence, over a decade of text messages between Thierry and Soline, retrieved from encrypted backups. The jury saw messages in which they discussed Malik's finances, referred to him as the investment, and even debated how much longer they could keep it going before they would have to end it. Some texts were chilling in their precision, listing Malik's account balances and instructions on how to pressure him for more. Thierry did not take the stand. He sat motionless for most of the trial, occasionally leaning toward his attorney but never showing visible emotion. Soline, on the other hand, testified in her own defense. She told the court she had been manipulated, that she lived in fear of what Thierry might do, that she had no idea his marriage to Malik was part of a long con. She claimed the night of Malik's death was the first time she realized how far Thierry was willing to go. But the prosecution countered with text after text, showing Soline giving instructions, arranging travel, and coordinating the disposal of valuables. They played audio of her booking flights under false names and confirmed that the gun used in the murder had her fingerprints on it. Private investigator Renee Carter testified about the moment she uncovered Thierry's real identity and marriage, producing copies of the French marriage certificate, birth records of the children, and social media photos of the family together in Marseille. Gloria Freeman took the stand, her voice trembling as she described the morning Malik failed to meet her on the porch for coffee, how she'd crossed the street and peered into the quiet, locked house. Patrick Wells followed, telling the court about his years of unease, his repeated warnings to Malik, and how his friend had always chosen to believe in the man who would ultimately destroy him. By the time closing arguments began, the weight of the evidence was crushing. The prosecutor's voice was steady as she told the jury that this was not just a crime of passion, it was a crime of calculation. 13 years of lies, carefully constructed and ruthlessly maintained, all to drain a man of his money and, when the well ran dry, his life. The defense had little left to offer. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours before returning with a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. When the judge read the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole for both, there was no visible reaction from Thierry. Soline lowered her head, shoulders shaking, though whether from grief or resignation was unclear. There would be no deals, no leniency, no chance for either of them to walk free again. In the gallery, Gloria clasped her hands tightly, fighting back tears, and Patrick stared at the polished wood of the defense table, knowing that justice had been served, but unable to shake the ache of loss. Malik had been a man who believed in kindness, in the possibility of love, even after years of loneliness. But the love he found had been nothing more than a performance, a script written to gain his trust, empty his accounts, and erase him when he was no longer useful. And now, all that was left was the truth, carved into the record for everyone to see. In the weeks after the sentencing, the quiet street where Malik Owens had lived still felt different. His porch sat empty, the rocking chair he'd once used gathering a thin layer of dust. Clover, his loyal Labrador, had been taken in by Gloria, who often caught herself glancing across the street in the early mornings, half expecting to see Malik's familiar smile and steaming mug of coffee. The case had been covered heavily in the news, not just because of its brutality, but because of the length and detail of the deception. 13 years of calculated fraud and emotional manipulation, it was the kind of story that unsettled people because it proved how easily trust could be weaponized. Friends and neighbors gathered for a memorial service at the local church, sharing stories about Malik's kindness and patience, about the years he'd spent mentoring young teachers and guiding troubled students before his retirement. Patrick Wells spoke last, his voice steady but his eyes damp. He said Malik had been the sort of man who gave people the benefit of the doubt, who believed that love, real love, was worth the risk. And that, he said quietly, was what made him vulnerable to someone like Thierry Duval. Across the country, the story reached people who had never met Malik. Letters arrived at Gloria's house from strangers who'd read about the case, some offering condolences, others admitting that they too had been manipulated or defrauded by someone they trusted. It struck a chord because it was not just a story about murder, it was a story about the thin line between devotion and exploitation. In prison, Thierry remained largely silent, refusing interviews and avoiding other inmates as much as possible. Soline, on the other hand, filed multiple appeals, each rejected in turn. She claimed she had been under duress, but the mountain of evidence left no room for doubt. Prison officials noted that the two rarely spoke to each other after sentencing, though they were housed in separate facilities hundreds of miles apart. Renee Carter, the private investigator, was quietly praised for her role in exposing the truth. She later said the case stayed with her more than most. It wasn't just the crime, it was the intimacy of it. She had seen theft and betrayal before, but rarely had she seen them carried out under the guise of a marriage that lasted more than a decade. She said that what chilled her most was how Thierry and Soline's plan didn't end with taking Malik's money. It ended with taking his life to make sure he could never fight back. For Gloria, the trial's conclusion brought some closure, but not peace. She still remembered the first morning Malik missed their coffee, how she'd stood on his porch with her hand hovering over the door, feeling a heaviness she couldn't explain. Now she understood it had been the moment everything changed, the moment the quiet safety of their neighborhood was shattered forever. In the years to come, she would often tell younger neighbors about Malik, about his generosity, his warmth, and the lesson his story left behind, that trust is a gift, and once given to the wrong person, it can cost you everything. And so, while Thierry and Soline would spend the rest of their lives behind bars, the echo of what they had done would live on far beyond the courtroom, carried in the memory of a man who only wanted to be loved and in the cautionary tale his life and death had become. Malik's absence was still felt long after the headlines faded. His house was eventually sold, the new owners unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. But for those who knew him, every detail of his story lingered. The porch where he once sat each morning remained a symbol of the life he had built, simple and steady until deception tore it apart. In prison, Thierry adjusted to life as a number, stripped of the charm and carefully constructed lies that had carried him for years. He had gone from husband, businessman, and provider to inmate, his double life exposed in every news article and court transcript. Soline, once poised and controlled, was now marked forever by the choices she had made. Despite her claims of fear, the jury had seen the truth, that she was as much a partner in crime as Thierry. There was no more running, no more schemes, only cold cement walls and the reality of life sentences that stretched endlessly before them. For Malik's friends, there was only memory. Patrick often said he still expected the phone to ring, Malik's voice asking about the latest church event or neighborhood news. Gloria sometimes sent out 2 cups of coffee in the mornings, a quiet ritual to honor her neighbor. She said it helped her feel less alone, though the silence never fully eased. His story was not just about betrayal or murder. It was about how love, when twisted by greed and lies, can become the deadliest trap. It was about how a man who only wanted companionship became the victim of a scheme so calculated it stole not only his savings, but his very life. And while Thierry and Soline will spend the rest of their days behind bars, the lesson remains for everyone who hears his story, that sometimes the danger isn't from strangers outside, but from the people we welcome into our homes and hearts. If you followed this story to the end, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about Malik's tragic case? Do you believe love can blind us to the truth? Or do you see this as something far darker, something cold and calculated from the very beginning? Let us know where in the world you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories just like this one. Your voice matters, your opinion matters, and together we keep these stories alive so the victims are never forgotten.